In this lesson, we're going to be going over how to set up a UI-based weapon menu. So this weapon menu will appear whenever we're holding down the B key, and it'll disappear whenever we let go of that B key. So this weapon menu is going to contain a few different types of buttons. These buttons are going to be our weapon icons, and whenever we left click on them, we're going to be selecting a specific weapon. So to get started, we are going to be in the Lesson 9 start. Let's take a look at the project source files real quick. So in the Lesson 9 folder, you're going to find the start package. You're also going to find the assets folder. Let's go and open this up. So we have a weapon selection menu, which we're going to be using right here. That's a PNG file. We also have the PSD file if you do want to make modifications to it. So make sure that you drag this into your UI folder. I have mine already set up for me. So within here in the UI folder, we have the weapon select. Make sure that you set the texture type to sprite, 2D, and UI. It is going to be single, so the sprite mode is going to be set to single, then hit apply at the very bottom to save your changes. All right, now we need to add this to our UI. Let's go to our UI system, right click on it, UI, image. We're going to call this weapon menu. Let's move this to the very top of our stack. And now we need to add in our weapon select image. So drag it into the source image slot. We need to adjust the width and height here. So the width and height is going to be 609 by 600. All right, there we go. Now I don't want this to appear directly in the middle, so I'm going to move this off to the side. Let's jump back into our scene view, and I'm going to move this off to the side right about here or so. Now this is all personal preference. You can place this wherever you want. I want the menu to appear right over here. Let's jump back to our game view. Now this weapon menu is going to be using a couple of icons which are going to be used as buttons. So let's right click on the weapon menu itself. Let's create a couple of new images. UI, image. Let's duplicate this. So we have two images which are going to be our buttons. The first one is going to be the handgun. The second one is going to be our Mac 11, which I'll name M11. So we're going to be using the same icons that we have within our sprite sheet for the icons for the handgun and the M11. They're the same icons we're going to be using in here as well. So that's going to be in the sprite sheet for the UI. And those are going to be number 4 and number 5 within our sprite sheet selection right here. So for the first one, the handgun, that's going to be number 4. Just drag it into the sprite slot. Make sure that you adjust the size. This is going to be 92 by 63. Do the same thing for the M11, which is going to be number 5. And this one's going to be 108 by 75. All right, let's select both of them. Let's jump back into our scene view. And I'm going to move these up to center it up a bit. Select the handgun itself. I'm going to use the translate tool. And place it right about here or so, kind of in the center. All right, there we go. Now I want to add in some text. It's just going to be a number 1 and a number 2 right here. That'll correspond with the keys on our keyboard, so number 1 and number 2, which will allow us to select the handgun and the Mac 11. So I'm going to right click on the M11, UI, and then text. And I'm just going to name this number 2. And we're going to drag this down. Now we don't need such a big box right here, so I'm going to adjust the size of this using the UI tool right here. Let's change the text to say 2. I'm going to be using the same font for Arial right here, and then the font size is going to be 25. Next, we'll adjust the alignment, so center it up. Change the color to white. And there we go. Now I want to duplicate this. So let's right click on it in the hierarchy, then duplicate. Move this underneath the handgun itself and rename this to 1. Let's move this over. And let's change the text to 1. Right, there we go. Now we need to make these icons into buttons. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to select the handgun first, and we're going to add a button component. So go to add component, type in button in the search bar, and click on the button component that appears. Now we're going to be adjusting the normal color. So the normal color is what the button is going to look like in its normal state. Now I don't want it to be bright white like it is now. I actually want this to be slightly transparent. So we're going to be adjusting the normal color, and we're going to be adjusting the alpha value. So I'm going to set this to a value of 50, so it's going to be slightly transparent. And we're going to be doing that for the Mac 11 as well. So once again, let's add our button component. Go into the normal color, adjust the alpha value down to 50. There we go. Now we'll be taking a look at the onClick event in a moment, but for now we're done with our UI elements. Now we need to take a look at the scripting, so we'll start off with the UI script first. Let's go into our UI. Alright, so at the very top we have a new namespace. Let's go ahead and uncomment this out. We need to have this namespace in there because we are going to be using a specific script that references that namespace or uses that namespace. So using Unity standard assets.characters.firstperson, and that's going to be used with our first person controller. We're going to be disabling this script whenever we have that menu system appear. At the very top, we have an array of images. So public image array weapon icons. This is going to be the same thing that we had with our weapons themselves. So we have an array of weapons. We also have an array of weapon icons. So once again, these are images. Next, within the public game object section, we have a public game object weapon menu. Now, the reason why we're including weapon menu here instead of as an image is because if we disable the image itself, the child elements will still be enabled. So if we use it as a game object, it'll disable all the child elements as well. So we have the public game object cam and also weapon menu. Next, we need a reference to both the scripts that we need. So the first one is going to be the public first-person controller script, and we're calling it controller script. So the first-person controller script is going to be disabled whenever we have that menu up here. That will prevent us from actually moving around within our scene. Next, we need a reference to our weapon cycle script, and we'll see why in a moment. Let's just jump down into our awake function. So we're going to grab both those scripts. So we have the controller script. We're going to grab the first-person controller script component. Same thing for the cycle script. We're going to be grabbing the weapon cycle component. We have a function and a set active right here. So we're going to be setting the weapon menu to false. Weapon menu.setActive false. This will disable that menu from appearing whenever we start our game. And we have a function here called weapon icon. We'll be going over that in a moment. Within the update function, we also have another function in here called weapon menu. And once again, that's going to be at the very bottom. So let's scroll down. All right, so let's take a look at the weapon menu. So here we're checking to see if we're pressing the B key. So if we're holding it down, notice that I'm using get key. That allows us to hold down a specific key, which is going to be B. So if we're holding down the B key, we're going to be doing all of this. Now, basically what we're doing in here is we're enabling and disabling various things. First off, we're setting our weapon menu to true. So weapon menu.setActive true is going to be enabled, which means it's going to be visible within our game. We're going to unlock our cursor, which will allow us to actually move our cursor around. It's no longer going to be locked to the center of our screen. And we also want to make sure that we set that to visible. So cursor.visible equals true. Not only can we move our cursor, but now we can actually see where it's at as well. Next, we want to be able to disable our shoot script. We don't want to be able to shoot while we're looking at our menu. Now, once again, this is all personal preference. If you do want to be able to shoot, go ahead and leave this out. Same thing for the controller script. We're going to be setting that to false so we don't move around. And then finally, we have the time.timescale equal to 0. So we're essentially pausing our game whenever we have that menu appearing on our screen. So we're disabling the shoot script, we're disabling the controller script, and we're also setting the timescale to 0. So we're stopping the in-game time. Now, if we let go of that B key, we have the else statement right here. We're doing the complete opposite of all this in here. So we want to disable the weapon menu. So we're going to set it to false. We want to lock our cursor back to the center of our screen. Then we want to disable the visibility of that cursor. So we're going to set that to false. We're going to enable both the shoot script and the controller script. And we're setting our time back up to 1. All right, so that's if we let go of our B key. Now down here, we have a public function. This is going to be used within our weapon cycle script. So we need to set it to public void weapon icon. And this is going to be very similar to what we had within the weapon cycle script. So we have a for each loop, which is looping through our weapon icons array, image obj in weapon icons. We're going to be setting them all to false to start. So obj.enabled equals false. And then we're setting one of those icons to true. So weapon icons, and this is going to be based off the cycle script. So weapon icons, notice the 2 brackets right here. Cycle script.currentWeapon.enabled equals true. So we're selecting one icon based on the cycle script to true. Let's go and save that out. Minimize this. All right, so now we need to assign our weapon icons. So we have our script ready to go. Let's actually lock our panel. So at the very top, you're going to click on the lock right here. It'll lock that panel. And now we're going to be selecting the icons from our ammo bounds. We're not going to be selecting the icons on this menu right here, but the ammo bounds itself. So open this up. Open up the weapon bounds, and you'll find the handgun and the Mac 11. Now we can enable the Mac 11 for now. Let's actually unlock this panel. We're going to enable that. Let's go back to our UI script. Let's lock the panel once again. And we're going to be assigning the handgun and the Mac 11. So select both of them and drag them over the weapon icons themselves. You'll see a little plus icon. Going to let go, and there we go. We have the handgun and the Mac 11. Now the order of these icons is important because it is going to be matching the order of the weapons themselves within the weapons array. So we have the handgun first and the Mac 11 second. Next, we need to assign our weapon menu. So let's go and close some of these up in here. The weapon menu is right here. Drag that into that first slot. Next, we need the controller script, which is attached to our moving rig, which is right here. Drag that into that slot. Next, we need the cycle script. Now, the cycle script is going to be on our rig itself, so the rig handgun. Right now, we don't have that script applied, so let's apply that script right now, which is called weapon cycle. Let's just drag it over here. And actually, before we do that, let's unlock this panel. So once again, drag it over. There we go. We're going to be going over this in a moment, but first let's assign it to our UI script. Drag the rig handgun into that last slot. There we go. So the cycle script is on the rig handgun. We have everything else assigned. Now we can take a look at our weapon cycle script. So I'm just going to double click on the weapon cycle script from the project panel. Now, if you've been through the weapon mechanics course, you should have a pretty good understanding of how this script works. So at the very top, we have our array of weapons. We have a reference to our animator, which will allow us to play our animations. We have a current weapon int variable. And now we have a reference to our UI script, since we are going to be calling a function within the script. In the awake function, we have a reference to our animator, which will allow us to play our animations from our character. Now within the update function, we're going to be looking for a few inputs. So the first one is going to be for the get key down keycode.x. So when we press the X key, we're actually going to be calling this function. We're no longer using animation events. Instead, we're just calling the functions directly within the script. So switch weapons is down here. And switch weapons was previously called with an animation event, but since we are going to be using the animation over and over again with different types of weapon cycling, we want to make sure that we don't use animation events and cause any kind of weird issues. So switch weapons has been set to a private function now, and we're going to be calling it when we press the X key, which allows us to kind of cycle through our weapon array. Now, if we want to select a specific weapon, that's where we're going to be using this section right here. So if input.getKeyDown keycode.alpha1, alpha1 is the one key on our keyboard, we're going to be selecting the first weapon within our array. Now we're going to be going over this function in a moment, but the 0 is the first weapon within our weapon array. We also have a else if, which is going to be looking for the second key, which is our number 2 key on our keyboard. That's going to be the second weapon within our weapon array. So weapon menu 1. Let's take a look at the switch weapons function. So once again, this is no longer a public function. So void switch weapons. Everything else is exactly the same. The main difference here is this section right here. So since we're no longer using animation events, we need a way to be able to slow down when those functions are being called. So we have invoke select weapon after 0.5 seconds. So after 0.5 seconds, then we're going to be calling the select weapon function. So if we take a look at the select weapon function, here we're looping through our weapons array. So for each game object obj in the weapons array, we're first going to set them all to false, meaning they're going to be disabled. Then we're going to select one weapon to set it true. So weapons, current weapon, .set active, true. We're going to be doing the same thing within our weapon icon function here, except we're using a weapon icon array. So uiscript.weapon_icon. Let's take a look at one more function. It's down here. This is a public function, so public void weapon menu. Public because we are going to be using this with a button itself. So this also needs to be set to public if you are using it with buttons like a on-click event or something of that sort. So public void weapon menu. And here we have a parameter. So this parameter will allow us to modify the current weapon variable when using the on-click event. So int I and then current weapon equals I. So if we were to change this, say, to 0, that's going to be the first weapon. If we change it to, say, number 1, that's going to be the second weapon. So this will allow us to change this current weapon variable right here based on what we click on in the on-click event. Now this function will also call for the animation to play, so we have the anim.setTriggerSwitch, hence why we remove the animation event. And once again, we have the invoke, which is going to be calling the select weapon after 0.5 seconds. All right, so we can go ahead and save this out, minimize this. It should be already applied to the rig handgun. If you haven't already applied it, make sure that you do apply it. We need to assign our weapons as well. So the rig handgun has been set up with the weapons for you. Open this up, open up the forearm right, the hand, and we have the handgun and the M11 directly underneath it. Now we need to go up into the inspector panel. Once again, let's go and lock this up so we can assign our weapons to our weapon cycle script. So we're going to select the handgun and the M11. Drag it over the weapons right here, once again, until you get the plus icon. There we go. We have the handgun and the M11. And once again, these need to be in the correct order. So the handgun is going to be first, and the M11 is going to be second to match our weapon icons array as well. We need to assign our UI script now. So we're going to be using the UI script from our UI. Drag that in. Let's go ahead and unlock this panel now. So we're done with our scripting. Now we need to go in and add some events to our buttons. So click on the UI, go into the weapon menu, and click on the handgun first. So we're going to be adding a couple different types of events. The first one is going to be an on-click event. So whenever we click on this button, what do we want it to do? So let's click on the plus icon here. And we're going to be calling a function from the weapon cycle script. So let's go back into our rig. We're going to be assigning the rig handgun into that object slot so we can access the weapon cycle script. Open this up, and you can see we have our weapon cycle script. Now this will only display whatever is public within the weapon cycle script. And here we have our public function, which is called weapon menu with the parameter of int. Now, like I mentioned before, the parameter here references the current weapon. So in this case, I want to select the first weapon whenever I call this specific on-click event, which is going to be 0. So 0 is the first weapon within our weapon array. So we want to keep this at 0. Let's do the same thing for our M11. So once again, go to the on-click section, click on the plus icon, drag in the rig itself, the rig handgun, go down to weapon cycle, then weapon menu. This time we're going to be changing this to 1. So whenever we left click on that button, we're going to be bringing up the second weapon within our array, which is 1. Now we need to add in one more event, and this is really kind of personal preference once again. This is just going to be for when we hover over these buttons. Now if we hover over these buttons, I want to play a sound clip. Now the sound clip that I'm going to be using actually comes from soundbible.com. It is a free sound clip, but I cannot distribute it myself, so I will be providing a link to it if you do want to find it yourself. So in the sound clips folder, I have a sound clip called Tick. I'm going to be adding this to a audio source, which I'm then going to be applying to a new event that we're going to be using. So let's go into our UI first. We're going to be adding an audio source, and we're going to be applying that Tick sound clip to that audio source. Click on Add Components, type in Audio, left click on Audio Source. You want to unshake play on awake. We only want to play this audio clip when we hover over that button. Drag in the Tick sound clip into that audio clip slot. Let's go back to our buttons. So for the handgun, we're going to be adding a pointer enter event. So to do that, you're going to go to Add Components, type in Event, and you want to select Event Trigger, not Event System, but Event Trigger. You're going to get a new button that pops up, Add a new event type. Click on that, and you want to click on Pointer Enter. Pointer Enter is going to be used for a on-hover event. So whenever we hover over that button, we're going to be using Pointer Enter. So when we hover over that button, we want to do something specific. We want to play an audio clip. So we're going to be adding our object, which has the audio source, which is our UI. Once again, open this up, and this time we can go down to audio source. We're going to go down to play. Let's do the same thing for our M11. Add component, event trigger, pointer enter. Adding the UI, audio source, play. All right, so I think we're just about done. Let's make sure that we didn't forget anything within our scripts themselves. So it looks like the UI script has everything already assigned. Make sure you don't forget anything. Do the same thing for the rig itself. So the rig handgun, most specifically, I'm looking at the weapon cycle script. So we have our UI script in here. We have our weapons. Same thing for the weapon icons. All right, so we're done setting everything up. Let's give this a quick test by clicking on play. So our weapon menu doesn't appear right now at the start of our game. If I hold on the B key, you can see my cursor appears. I can't move around. I can't shoot, anything of that sort. If I hover over these, you should hear a sound clip. If I left click on the Mac 11, it should play the animation to have our Mac 11 appear. Now sometimes the animations kind of disappear. That's just kind of a weird bug. But if I press the X key, I can switch weapons as well. If I press the 1 key, I can switch weapons here as well. Once again, press the B key, everything stops. I can't move around. I can press the handgun icon right here, and there we go. Alright, so that's a very simple way to add a UI-based weapon menu.